Hi, welcome back to WebRTC Tips from WebRTC.Ventures. I'm Aaron Saad, CEO and founder at WebRTC.Ventures. We focus on building live video applications using the WebRTC standard. And today I want to talk a little bit about building HIPAA compliant video applications. A lot of the work that we do at WebRTC.Ventures has been in telehealth and healthcare applications using video. And this even predates the coronavirus pandemic because there are some built-in security features, some built-in encryption to WebRTC that makes it a little bit easier to build a HIPAA compliant application. So telehealth is certainly one industry vertical that's been interested in this type of work for quite some time, and that's only accelerated with the pandemic as well. So today we're going to talk about building HIPAA compliant video applications. And the first thing really important for me to say is this is not legal advice. I'm not a lawyer. I'm an engineer by training. And anything we say in this video, really just think of this as a starting point for understanding how the HIPAA regulations may apply in building a telehealth application. It's based on our experience as a software development company. It's most definitely not comprehensive legal advice. You need to speak with legal counsel, preferably someone with experience not only in healthcare but in telehealth, to really understand how the HIPAA guidelines apply to your specific situation. They are complicated, and we're just going to touch on some important aspects of it today that you need to consider in building a HIPAA compliant video application. So a little bit of background on HIPAA. It stands for the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, a law passed in the United States in 1996, so it predates live video on the internet. It's therefore not a checklist of exactly what you need to build into your application or giving you very specific technical recommendations for applications as they're being built now, many years later. And likewise, there's no certificate that you're going to put on your wall that says the HIPAA governing authority has certified my application as compliant. It's not really how it works. But nonetheless, there are a lot of non-technical practices in it that are important for guarding patient data and patient privacy that are very important to follow, as well as it gives us guidance that we can use in designing our applications and how we implement the technology behind a telehealth application. There's a few legal terms that you need to be familiar with as you consider HIPAA compliance in an application. The first is covered entity, and that basically is a definition of who must adhere to the HIPAA regulations. So are you a covered entity or not? You probably need to talk to legal counsel about that as well. Certainly the medical professionals in a medical clinic or a hospital certainly are, they definitely have to adhere to HIPAA rules, but also really anyone who works with or stores a patient data may also be considered a covered entity. Talk to legal counsel about that, but it can include server hosting companies that are involved in your telehealth application, as well as development companies like us at WebRTC.Ventures that you may contract with to build your application. And when you're working with vendors and subcontractors like that, the other term you need to be familiar with is a BAA, a business associate agreement, which is something that those other vendors would need to sign with you, indicating that they also understand how the HIPAA rules apply to them and their work on your telehealth application, and that they're promising to adhere to notification rules and treating that patient data very confidentially. And then the final term mentioned here is PHI, or for protected health information, or you may also hear that as PII, patient identifying information. Also very important, basically referring to any data that you have indicating the health diagnosis of that patient, certainly, but also just identifying who that patient is. So it can be things like name, address, phone number, email address, social security number, all of those things in addition to the actual medical notes need to be encrypted in your system. So we have a number of tips here, technical and non-technical, for you to consider in building your HIPAA compliant video application. The first is that all of that PHI, all of that patient data needs to be encrypted, both in transit and at rest. So in transit, the first thing is to make sure that you're always using HTTPS. So you have SSL encryption on all of the connections to your web application or in services behind it, so that all of that data is encrypted as it transits over the internet. Also considering the information that you might need to pass around within the application. Simple example might be putting like a patient ID in a query string or in post data, or signaling to establish your video call. You may want to pass some information about the patient who's connecting into this call. All of that type of information is identifying information about that patient. So if you're going to pass it in situations like that, it needs to be encrypted. And then also thinking about the PHI at rest. So encrypting any data in your database, certainly, as well as thinking about other things like the backups of that data, whether they're in another cloud location or an offsite storage, making sure that if someone is able to access those backups, that the data in that is also encrypted so that they can't do anything with it. Second tip to consider is in designing your application, how it's going to be used by your users, being very careful about the roles and responsibilities. Basically, you want to control who can see what patient data in your application. So certainly a patient using your telehealth call should only see their own data and not see anything about other patients. That's pretty obvious. But also within the medical professionals who are using your application, thinking about the different roles that they have. Perhaps a doctor or a nurse sees different information, has access to different information than an office admin would. Or perhaps they see different groups of patients depending on who's assigned to them. All of these sorts of things you need to think about in the design of your application, and make sure that when someone logs into the application, they only see the information required to do their task at hand, to do their job. And that way, if their account into the system gets hacked, it minimizes the exposure of patient data. And we're talking specifically about video applications here too. That's the focus of our work at WebRTC.Ventures and our work in telehealth. And so we need to think about video data also as a form of PHI, as confidential information about that patient. So again, we have to think about encrypting and protecting that data both in transit and at rest. So just like any other patient data, we should be following that best practice for any sort of application, really, of using HTTPS in our URLs and enforcing that the only way you can access our application is through an SSL connection. So that way, everything is encrypted over SSL, but also the WebRTC standard by design encrypts the video and audio traffic in transit. It still is unencrypted on the media servers and on the endpoints. So we still also need to think about the security of those aspects of the application. And also we need to think about what else we might be doing with that video data beyond just sharing it between the pairs, between the peers for a call. So for instance, if you're recording that video call, you need to be very careful about how you handle that video recording. So making sure that it is stored safely with security protocols around it so that no one can access that recording and play it if they don't have the right role or responsibility in your system. And then other things maybe you might do with that video as well, thinking about how to protect that data. For instance, if you're taking the audio and sending it off somewhere to be transcribed, protecting that data both in transit and storage as well. There are a lot of non-technical processes and aspects of HIPAA that I mentioned that you need to consider. Even though we at WebRTC Ventures, we might be your development team or you might be a developer yourself, we still need to be aware of these processes and think about them. We need to make sure that everyone on the team, both the medical professionals using this application as well as the technology team around it, have been trained on what to do when a data breach occurs. Having those notification policies in place and well-defined is an important part of HIPAA compliance, and they need to be understood by everyone in the team. And we need to have an information security officer who is doing regular audits of the system. And those audits do need to be on a regular basis. This HIPAA compliance is not just a one and done thing that you do at the beginning of a project. It's really ongoing. It never stops. Just like any other aspect of security of your system, honestly. The information security officer should be involved in technical decisions around the application. You should have people auditing new releases for making sure that there's not anything we're about to release in an update to the application that accidentally makes it easier to access patient information or creates a security loophole of some kind. So we need to be looking for these things and auditing our system constantly, as well as even in the non-technical matters too, making sure that those policies and procedures are kept up to date, that new team members are trained on them. HIPAA compliance really is a whole team effort. It's not just the security team. So all of us, whether we're medical professionals or software developers around a telehealth application, need to be kept up to date on our responsibilities in protecting that patient privacy. So HIPAA compliance is not simple, and this was just giving you a sample of some of the things that you need to think about in it. We're happy to talk to you about this more and talk about building your telehealth application in general. Just contact us at WebRTC.ventures. You can also follow us on Twitter at WebRTC.ventures. Thanks again for joining me. I'm Aaron Syme, CEO and founder of WebRTC.ventures, bringing you this WebRTC tip.